personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a very special guest here with me today. It took us quite a while to get this interview going, but I'm so happy that we were able to connect. I have Kavya Pearlman, who is the founder and CEO of the XRSI Safety Initiative. XRSI has to do with all types of reality, right? The virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, any types of reality that we can think about. And Kavya is, in addition to that, she's leading this particular initiative, which is fascinating. And she was kind enough to invite me to participate in this initiative. And I thought it was just fascinating and I love to talk about it. So this is a privacy framework for XR, all types of reality. But I would love for Kavya to be able to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about this initiative and your work in this space in terms of technology and safety and privacy.
Thank you, Debbie, for having me over. I know it's taken us a while to have this conversation, but it's a good thing that we're working so closely on the privacy and safety framework. So I'm really honored to be working so closely with you on this effort. About me, where should I start? Well, let's talk about my tech journey. If
Okay.
let's talk about that, because oftentimes I get comments and feedback that people find it very inspiring, and I hope that it helps other people to feel enabled and empowered to do what I did. Is I had the audacity to transition my career from a hairstylist to a cybersecurity professional. And as I did that, and I was, head of security for a virtual reality company, or the oldest existing virtual world, Second Life, then I got this, ideas that all these unintended consequences are coming for the industry. And I started this XR safety initiative. But just a little bit going back to, in 2007, I had moved to the United States, and I was like, hey, this is a free country. You can be anything that you want to be. So that's when I decided to be a cosmetologist, and was just working as a hairstylist for about 4 or 5 years, until one day I read this book called Cyber War, and simply decided that this is my calling, this is my journey. And I got enrolled in master's in network security. Thereafter, after I graduated, I moved to California, worked for a corporate immigration law firm for about a year. And in about 2016, I found myself working for Facebook, doing third-party security in during a very interesting time, which was the U.S. presidential election time in 2016. So that sort of a knowledge of how to onboard all sorts of flavors and types of technologies, being a third-party security advisor, and then I moved to this, virtual reality and virtual world company, Linden Lab, that made the oldest existing virtual world, where I was protecting two virtual economies, doing some compliance work. And so this has been quite a journey. And I'm really glad that, this whole notion of XR safety initiative came to me. In fact, I was looking for somebody who knew or who was doing similar work. And that's when I found Ibrahim Begili, so our senior advisor, who was basically conducting research and discovered novel cyber attacks in VR. And so together we formed, just started to work towards this initiative. And now we are building standards and putting guidelines together. And there has been many, many projects that have stemmed from it. There are multiple programs. So I'm just I'm just honored and privileged to be sitting here in the middle of Berkeley, nearby Berkeley, California, where the internet was born. And now I get to sort of fix or proactively propose what could be done better based on what we did before, the making of the internet.
Wow, that is amazing. I did not know any of that. So I am definitely a fan of you and what you've done. One thing that I can say about you is there are just there are very few people like you, I would say, that I
Oh,
know.
you're so kind. Thank you.
So there's something that you can do that I could probably count five people who can do what you're doing right now, which is you have a deep understanding of technology. You know how to talk to people at different levels, and then you also know how to organize or orchestrate or uh, operationalize things. And most people they just don't have. That's like five people right there. So you're kind of like five different highly skilled people rolled up into one. And believe me, I know because I work with people all over the world in different types of industries, and you just really stand out. So
Thank you so much. And that's very validating and empowering to hear from you. But I have to say, I have this other skill that is probably the skill is to find people like you. And as you know, I'm kind of like a pest. I found you and I was like, no, I really need you. And so I have this ability to bring these brilliant people together. And so they are the ones that, help me excel and help enable the missions that I'm able to discover, is like proactively discover some problems that people may not even think about for next 2 years. But then the 2 years pass by and they're like, oh my God, this is a problem. And, just like COVID happened and now everybody's moving to VR. So we are already sort of geared up and preparing for what is the unintended consequences, what could be the bad thing that come along. So, yeah, thank you so much for validating that.
that's amazing. That's amazing. Also, you're doing something else that's very important for privacy folks to really understand, and that is we have to break down the silos of different, all of us have our different skill sets and things like that. But if, in terms of privacy, in order for us to really be able to solve or face this challenge, we have to break down those silos and reach across, the table to people that maybe we would not have otherwise even been in contact with. And I feel like you creating that environment with this project, which is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes we hear this whole idea of multidisciplinary or multifaceted or multi-skilled. But I really took to it because if you look at extending reality, which is like the notion of using technologies to extend your perceived reality by means of like, head-mounted display goggles. And pretty soon, I mean, we're seeing augmented reality glasses that could look very similar to just a traditional eyewear. And we are extending our perceived reality into a new realm where you could have all these other, different software coded, data represented, visualized version of reality. So when you do that, you're practically inventing a whole new world. And every domain, every like it is influencing how we travel or tourism, education, how we learn, remote work, how we conduct surgery or training certain clinicians. So there is just like all these gamut of domains that are impacted by this phenomena of extending realities. So it's really important that all of those people pay attention to the privacy impact, because every domain is going to experience it differently. So for example, in medical XR domain, you may not be super concerned about the you know ki- people's data being being available and open, because you need that data for diagnosis. You need all of this data. So how do we create those boundaries in different domains? Absolutely requires all these multidisciplinary thought processes, bringing in these medical or education or all these experts. So I'm really glad that people have started to notice this effort, because it is very important and imperative that we go in sort of a proactive stance, because once these issues are baked into some of these products, it is going to be impossible to undo them. especially when you talk about the cross section of artificial intelligence and some of this digitization of all of our movements, gaze, pose, all this data. Once it is digitized, once it's inside the algorithm, it is almost impossible to rectify the unintended consequences, the biases that go in. So yeah, I'm really honored that all of this is sort of coming together, and we're sort of able to be a little bit proactive about this.
I agree. I think, um, you know, a lot of the things that are being created with technology right now, there really aren't even laws for this stuff. So,
Yeah.
being able to articulate what things do, why they do what they do, what's important, just like you said, in medical, some applications it may be important to delete the data right away, but in sort of a diagnostic situation, you may have to keep the data over time because there has to be kind of a comparative analysis there. So thinking about it in that way, I think is really interesting. I think when I think about people who aren't in this realm, just like consumers in general, when they think of virtual reality, they think automatically of gaming, right? They think of kind of a goggle that maybe their kid or someone who plays video games works with. But virtual reality is so many has so many different applications that I feel like people aren't really thinking about in the right ways. What's your thought about that?
Yeah, and you're right. Most people, because for whatever reason, either it is the lack of exposure, lack of availability, or just lack of desire to really venture out of their own comfort zone, um, they think that avatar and this VR is or AR is only related to gaming, or it's all about gaming. But I mean, just this morning I was interviewing in a VR environment. I was interviewing Valentino Miguel, who is conducting therapy using VR, and we were literally just talking about what are the developmental issues that could emerge from exposing VR to children at early ages, and what research needs to happen. So virtual reality and augmented reality, so this whole XR domain is way beyond gaming. People can now imagine you could literally virtually see an apartment that you want to purchase, so, along with whatever light fixture, the lighting and everything, but you can virtually visit it instead of like taking a trip to LA, for example. Or my mom, who is in India, could potentially see my house or my environment just using VR and feel like she's actually here. So we are moving towards this idea of teleportation and not like transportation. And this was something Zuckerberg said. It was one time I would agree with him that we should all be teleporting and not transporting, because it also eliminates the carbon footprints. It speaks to a lot, especially now with COVID, we have this necessity to be together but still be apart. So VR plays a huge role, and it is acting as a catalyzing event to now the adoption of this technology. So what I encourage people is, if you stumble upon this sort of acronym XR, extended reality, or simulated reality, or virtual reality, um, dig deeper, because there is a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges that are coming along. And not just because of virtual reality, but there is a phenomena of convergence. This technology is converging with lots of different technologies, such as artificial intelligence, or 5G for network infrastructure, or brain computer interfaces for providing input into these devices and sort of creating multimodal input mechanism and realities. And like the list is endless, but like robotics being one of them. You can potentially use virtual reality goggles to manipulate or move certain, like forklift or move a person who could be, potentially in a robotic form. So these are things that are just sort of converging, still on the horizon. Not all of it is right here, but this is exactly where we got to learn from the history, is we have to stay ahead of what is to come, because there is a notion of what we call as the cooling ridge dilemma, where once you have these massive changes that can be potentially irreversible, once they're baked in, it would be too late. So in this context, what XRSI recommends, do like a recursive design, or just like a smaller sprint, so you know that if there is a irreversible really bad consequences and you recognize it, you can kind of backtrack from it, or you can upgrade or fail forward or simple fail kind of thing. And so those are things that are emerging, converging, and opening up so many opportunities, but at the same time bringing so many challenges, which we are kind of advocating to stay ahead of.
Yeah. I feel like, the past and the present has been about keeping people's attention, right? Whether it's notifications or whatever, something getting your attention. But I feel like just talking to you and thinking about the technologies that are coming about, I think now our gaze is what is desired, right? What do you think about that?
Oh yeah. Um, I would recommend my colleague Avi Barziv, and I highly recommend following him on Twitter. He has written extensively about, one of his articles was like, the eyes are the prize. So eye tracking technology being the advertising holy grail. And it's a good thing and a bad thing, because from the eyes, and then the sensors that connect and collect the data where you're positioned, so like body motion data or pose data. What's happening now is all of this data is digitized and recorded, and it's being shared with various different entities. So yes, this is a highly concerning scenario, because some inferences can be good, but then some inferences can be kind of risky. And I'll take an example. In fact, at XRSI, with the launch of the first version 1.0 of XRSI Privacy Framework, we outlined this idea of biometrically inferred data. So as you say, Debbie, gaze data, that can probably help us attribute to, what you love, not just like, but like, what do you love? What instances do you love? Perhaps a biometric identity, like a fingerprint, can be captured just the way you move your head or your motion. People can contextualize your cultural background based on your voice imprints or cognitive processes, whether you have slept enough. So all of this, like, the amount of cognitive load or your skills and abilities. I mean, fairly recently, there was a research that indicated by typing patterns, you can determine how fast or slow somebody's multiple sclerosis MS is progressing. So imagine if we have these type of a sophisticated metadata that can attribute to all of these personality traits or mental health and all these other plethora of inferences. What if that data is shared with Blue Cross Blue Shield or any other, like, any other insurance providers, and then they come to know proactively that this is what's happening, and they deny you coverage? And it's not they, but perhaps there is an AI algorithm that is designed to keep track of, because to bring down the cost or to be stay ahead of increased costs. So that's a problem. Likewise, if some of this data ends up in, let's say, recruitment interview type of algorithm, so you could be denied an interview based on, hey, you don't even know, so you might be changing your lifestyle, such as pregnancy or something, and if somebody else knows first, you could be denied some of the opportunities. So this is just a very basic of it, but when you talk about large amount of data, we've already seen, let me bring up an example of Cambridge Analytica. So in 2016, during US presidential election time, the third party of Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, used about 5,000 data points to micro-target American citizens. Each of the American citizens had 5,000 data points on them, and they micro-targeted them, they influenced, and there's tons of research that's already been done that there was a massive influence campaign that was potentially, kind of seen and talked about. It was the biggest data scandal. But now compare that to another research in 2019 from Stanford University, where you can now, and this is 2019, so this is probably more with convergence of other technologies too, but in 20 minutes in a VR simulation, you could record over 2 million unique recordings of body language. So 5,000 data points did that. Now we have this constant capture of our reality, which is going to be possible with these augmented reality glasses. And in VR, you can already record that many data points. So we really ought to ask, like, what does the next Cambridge Analytica look like? Or is it already here? We just recently saw the day of insurrection, and that had a huge component of all the data and social media biases and stuff. So all of this is, building towards this kind of a massive event that could really diminish our trust in these technologies. And that's where I kind of try to go, is try to enable innovation, share the data, but share it in a way that it incorporates and enables trust. So that's how I'm going about solving it. And you're absolutely right, these gaze, pose, body movements, and now we are going to be talking about brain computer interfaces. So you're talking about EKG, EEG, medical related data that used to be just limited to doctors, and now it's available to just developers that are just like thinking, hey, I'm going to develop an app for mental health, and now they have all of your biometric inferred data. And that's a issue that not even at congressional level anybody actually understands. So we're still just like uncovering all these issues, and then we have to go all the way to the policy side. So someday we can have regulations that actually comprehend and talk about this type of data, and put restrictions in place so that vulnerable population can benefit from or vulnerable population is not put at risk. So all of these considerations are just something that are going into this framework, and hopefully we'll get somewhere with this.
Yeah, that's great. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk about that. That it just occurred to me as you were talking about that, because I'm seeing, especially a lot of people want to use different biometric markers, especially retina scans. That's going to be the hot new thing. So being able to sort of get that picture of someone's eye, or people's eyes change over time, obviously too. So that may be an issue as well. I think when we think about things like virtual reality, augmented reality, because it's so attached to our being and our bodies and what we're doing. The reason why, well, there are many reasons why what you're doing is very important, but one of the big reasons why it's important to do what you're doing in a proactive stance is because the harm can be almost instant, right? Where it isn't a situation where you can say, well, we'll just let the courts handle it. It's like, but the harm has already happened, and the redress may not be adequate, you know what I mean, or timely enough to actually to address this issue. So I think in some ways, um, law isn't enough to be able to protect
Yeah.
people after the fact. Because a lot of when we think about laws, it's like a harm has happened. Let's create a law, and then hopefully it won't happen again. But this is a situation where, especially when you're dealing with someone's kind of their body and their life and the way that their mode of living, is important to protect that, on the onset, and think about those things. What types of things do you think would make it important for businesses to understand, that will make them, I don't know, maybe this is just a classic thing where some people
Right.
think privacy is kind of a tax on what they're doing, or an additional burden, where I think more proactively, as you do,
Right.
let's prevent the problem, let's prevent the harm, let's think about what's the best way to do it, so that down the line you're not dealing with this on the back end. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and you hit the nail. Like, prevent is the key word here, and as you know, very deliberately we're advocating about. So there are certain shifts in the thought processes when we approach technologies that need to happen. One of the things that we need to understand is exactly what you said about prevent. We need to prevent harm. Once something is done, especially when you talk about children's brain or vulnerable population, for example, which includes women, minorities, and it could just be a normal person, but just by means of existing in a country where there are no human rights or very lack of it, such as Iran or China, these things can be really, really problematic. It could even be like life threatening because of, perhaps their identity is revealed. So when it comes to approaching these proactive mechanism, we have to really be proactive, and that's why we've deliberately put prevent as a focus area, where you're not just protecting, you are actually preventing harm in terms of harassment. For example, we've never seen before this any framework address harassment at the level of like safety effort or at the level of creating a framework. So harassment, bullying, content moderation. Why do we do content moderation? Because we want to proactively get ahead of the problems that will stem from it. Identity is a huge issue because, some people believe that in VR or in AR, you can be whoever you want to be. But as I explained, the biometrically inferred data can create an exact imprint, a fingerprint. In fact, there was another research done by Stanford just, I believe it was this in 2020, yeah, last year, where they sampled about 500 of known sort of identities. And so within this 500 subset, when the subject was shown a 360-degree video, which is not your coded VR environment, but it's still like, a video or a 360-degree video of your environment. When they were watching it, within the 5 minutes of watching that 360-degree video, the researcher were able to establish who exactly is this person. So that should tell you that identities of individuals are highly at risk. So now comes the whole notion of like, okay, well, we need to tell people. So then there is the whole idea of informing people, but with context. It's like, hey, you're in this particular context and this is what's happening to your data, giving people choice of what they can or cannot do with the data, giving them control over data. So all of this is kind of the shift that we need to make. One other shift in the thought process is about child safety. So if we look at today's landscape or the legal landscape for children's safety, it's like COPA is the law. Let's say GDPR says, hey, nobody below 13 or 16 should be, you should gather a consent if you do that. So what does that consent look like? People put a checkbox, hey, are you over 13, 16, or 18, or whatever the age they decide based on the jurisdiction. But then people just check the box and move on. And now next thing you see, there's so many children that are putting these, goggles or exposing themselves to these XR environments, but we don't have any guidelines or research as to what is an appropriate age. Even Facebook that says 13 above, but that's like written tiny little bit over there on the box. It says 13 plus. That is not advocacy for children's safety. That is not explaining to parent that, hey, if you're putting your kids under 13 in these environments, you are practically experimenting with their brain. And I see educated people doing the same thing. I see people who don't know anything any better. And then there are some experts who basically go around like, oh, it's okay if you let people in VR chat, which is to me sometimes can be like a literal troll fest. And so why would you want to expose your children to that? So child safety is like one of the major concern. And I anticipate that one of the very first law that we will see around virtual reality and augmented reality would be related to children's safety and would be related to conducting more research just for children's safety. And then there is this special data type consideration, as we talked about, gaze, pose, biometrically inferences. So while in the regulation side, we are just stuck with PII, personal identifiable information, or personal data, or max we do like a personal health information, PHI. But we're not thinking about all this other metadata that can actually put people at risk, that can cause all sorts of inferences. Perhaps some inferences are good, like, hey, what do I like to shop? Some suggestions from Amazon, Facebook, that's okay. But to what extent do we allow this? Do we allow all these medical and other inferences to go in these algorithms and to be used against us? So all of these key points have to be changed, and we have to shift our thinking to go from like fighting the fire to proactively being preventing the harm. And so that's hopefully we'll be successful in shifting this thought process, shifting the narrative, the way the industry pursues safety or privacy and cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's excellent. What do you think about just on the consumer side? I feel like there's a chasm, right?
Hmm.
So we have people creating these sophisticated technologies. They want to get them in people's hands and in their homes, but I feel like people don't know how to protect themselves. They don't know, they're not an informed consumer, right? So is, let's say for instance the device does the three things that I wanted to do. I don't care about the other seven things that they do, but maybe those other seven things, if you knew about them, you make a different decision or you change the way that you use it. What are your thoughts about that?
Right. And it's a really, really good question. What about us as consumers? Should we be responsible for the decisions that these companies are making, or should they be responsible for the decisions they're making? So before we commence, like I remember the kickoff of this privacy and safety framework, my very first slide was privacy is a shared responsibility. And that's what I would kind of hammer on, is that from the consumer perspective, yes, we do want we do want to trust these ecosystems, but I believe we are at a cross section where we can't no longer just blame everything on the companies. We have to sort of own up to the responsibility of what is my responsibility to make sure that I'm not allowing my child under 13 to giving away all this data. What is my responsibility when I'm inside these environments or when I'm extending my reality? What about the user interaction? How am I interacting in world and even outside? I mean, think about bystanders. So, people with augmented reality, once they start to capture our reality, there's going to be people who are just around you. And so, what about their consent? So, we have to, again, advocate this notion of shared responsibility, because companies can give you these controls. That's the advocacy that we do as well, is like, hey, organization, please give consumers these rights. But even if you have the right to delete or right to be forgotten or something, you have to actually exercise that right. So consumers have to be made aware, first the consequences, then second the control mechanisms that actually are being built so that people can be a little bit more in control of their data. So I feel like needs to be a little bit of awareness that, of course, and we are kind of working on it. We have our media platform called Ready Hacker One. We're trying to gear stories towards something that you can trust, news that you can benefit from, knowledge that in the XR domain people have, and then share with them. But that's it. It will start with awareness. It should start with awareness of consumers, so they become familiar with these new technologies, familiar with the convergences that are taking place and the impact that it would have on consumers. And thereafter, we can go about, okay, now we have created some sort of awareness, but at the same time creating adoption of different frameworks, and then potentially enforcing these type of frameworks so that we can actually, you know just like GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, say, hey, if you don't follow XYZ guidelines, which potentially could put people at risk, then you will be fined, or some other kind of reprimand. You will be reprimanded. So all of this is definitely, building towards what the consumer is going to get out of it. It's not just gain, but a lot of the other unintended consequences. We just need to create awareness and then go after that.
Yeah. I also want to talk with you about the XRSI Privacy Framework, which is something that we're working on together that you invited me in, which I'm really happy to join you in this effort. The interesting thing about this framework, which I think is different, and maybe I'm exaggerating in my own mind, but a lot of times when people create frameworks, they create it and then they don't do anything with it for years. So it doesn't change for many, many years. So it's interesting to me that on the heels of releasing 1.0 part of the framework, you went directly into 1.1, which I think is brilliant. But tell me your thinking about that.
Right. And thank you for asking that question. And it is a very significant effort. It's a community driven, solution oriented, very agile and iterative thing that we're kind of trying to create together with so many experts, including you, Debbie. So this framework is free, globally accessible, and has this sort of a layered structure. When I say layered structure, first we identified what are the focus areas. So it's like, okay, 4 focus areas. And it also gives like a simple language that even a CEO or a receptionist, anybody can talk about this, like 4 focus areas. Underneath it, various functions. So in version 1.0, we had 14 function. In 1.1, we could have more functions. So the reason why it needs to be iterative like this, because the technology is changing. We're still developing features. So in these amazing virtual world where you're using um, software as a building material and inventing touch, inventing sense, inventing hand tracking and eye tracking and embedding it into different use cases, this is still evolving. So, yes, we need a proactive framework, but it has to be iterative so it can kind of evolve with the technologies, because the risks would sometimes diminish. Sometimes we will, just inevitably encompass new risks. So, that's why it has to be that way. Also, it allows us to then focus on things that are of essence. For example, in the current effort, we are focusing on higher ed as well as medical XR domain, because we feel that this is where a lot of the industry leaders are looking for solutions. After the introduction or the launch of this Quest 2 headset from Facebook, there were a lot of concerns from the higher ed and the researchers about privacy, about their identity. And there is a regulation, FERPA, which is the Federal Education I think it's I'm forgetting the acronym, what it stands for. Federal Education Responsibility something. Let me quickly look it up. Yeah, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. So FERPA says that you should not share students' data, but when you use this headset, there is the issue of Facebook identity, and that means you can't really share the data with the organization, or who is it going to? Is it going to Facebook or their third party? So all of these issues emerge, and some of the industry leaders that I talked to, they really needed a solution. So we're like, okay, let's work on this. And then comes the medical XR, where patient safety is primary. And if we don't have any standards, guidelines, or framework, what we are doing is we're just experimenting on patients using these massively amazingly new technologies. And that should not happen. We should have some baseline measures. And I'm
Right.
aware that FDA is working on stuff like that, but we still need supplemental guidance. And that's kind of where XRSI fits in.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. Well, I'm proud to work with you on this, just because I obviously really, love the way you're thinking and the way that you're managing this. So I'm happy to be able to help you on this endeavor. Um, my last question I always ask people is, if it were the world according to Kavya, and we do whatever you say, what would be your wish for privacy or data privacy, either in the US or around the world?
So I think I can only give the answer for today. And I don't know what the future looks like, but perhaps my answer would differ in the future. So, in an ideal world, um, given the kind of technologies we're building, we would be so clear on our expectations of privacy. So, yes, we will have constant reality capture. Yes, we will have tons of data going back and forth. But if we could have clear expectations and clear control and clear accountability of privacy, we will solve a lot of problems. We will build a lot of trust. So, companies being more accountable, uh, people who are impacted by these technologies, even if they're not using it, they're just standing on the side. If they knew what is to be expected in terms of privacy from these technologies, life would become simpler, then or mechanisms would be evident because they know, hey, I'm standing here, that means some of my data is going into this. Or accountability means companies will give them option to opt out or not opt in based on their reasonable expectations. So I feel like if I could really just do that magic wand, then I would hope that all the regulators have good laws around privacy. Companies are creating reasonable privacy control mechanism, and then people understand their expectation of privacy once they change the context. So that would be an ideal world, at least at the moment.
That's actually really good because I like the fact that you're talking about accountability of the individual as well, as opposed to just putting it on someone else's responsibility. So I agree that there is a shared responsibility. And I love the fact that everyone answers this question differently. So, well, thank you so much for being on the show, for letting me interview you. And I'm happy that we were able to get this arranged. I was happy to see this on my calendar. So thank you so much, Kavya.
Thank you so much. And if I may just say, I really appreciate you bringing in more people to get involved with this framework. I appreciate all the support that you have lended, and now even handling an entire section of compliance for the framework, which is remarkable. So thank you for leading the space together with me. And I'm really happy that you've arrived at XR and helping me out here. And anyone else also, wanting to get involved, please contact Debbie or myself. Go to xrsi.org, or just, we are always on LinkedIn and Twitter. Just, DM us and stuff. We are still working on this. It's an open project right now. Will commence in May. So would love anyone who's interested to get involved.
That's amazing. Yeah, I would love that. So definitely I'm trying to wrangle people and anyone who's really interested in this space. I really want you to go to Kavya's website, xrsi.org, correct?
Yes.
And take a look at what's there and see if that's something you'd like to be getting involved in. I would love to see other people join in. So thank you so much again. It's so sweet that you were able to do this with me, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.